We have seen President Biden and the First Lady visit Uvalde, as those communities will forever be changed in the wake of all of this. But right now, President Biden is going to be making remarks, and so it'll be interesting to see what he will call for. You'll remember, he was vice president. He was around for 8 years for other mass shootings of this type, most notably Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut, and of course, gun legislation stalled there in the Senate. We want to put both of these shots up for you, both at the White House and inside the White House, as we continue to await for President Biden to step up to the podium. Of course, we heard from the president in the immediate aftermath of the Uvalde Robb Elementary School shooting. Remember, he was back from his trip to Asia. They prepared remarks, and he spoke in prime time as well, offering his condolences and saying that essentially the powerful gun lobby needs to be reckoned with. Those were his words. I'm being joined in the newsroom, though, by my colleague Daytona Everett as we await President Biden, who should be stepping up to the podium in the next few minutes. Daytona, your thoughts?
Andrew, I don't think there's really any clear indication of exactly what these remarks are going to entail from President Biden. There's been a lot of push from specifically Democrats on Capitol Hill, as you said. There's legislation that's already been presented, but many of the people I've been speaking with, including family members of former shooting victims, school shooting victims, specifically at Parkland, they're saying this shouldn't be a Second Amendment issue. This should be a bipartisan issue, and lawmakers should be able to come together and figure out some sort of initiative that is going to help not only these school shootings, but like you said, grocery store shootings, hospital shootings. Just yesterday, it seems like the list continues to grow every single day as to where these shootings are happening. You don't feel safe anywhere. And even in New York, we were speaking with our reporters about a new initiative from Mayor Adams about putting a gun violence czar into place that is specifically going to focus on gun legislation. Is that the answer? We don't know. Only time will tell.
Of course, we've also heard from
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 6 Semper Tyrannis News. I'm your host, Mark Matheny. Tonight, Biden is coming out to address gun control. Here it is now. Let me pull that up on the screen. He is now stumbling his way to the podium. Here we go, folks. Get ready.
On Memorial Day this past Monday, Jill and I visited Arlington National Cemetery. As we entered those hallowed grounds, we saw rows and rows of crosses among the rows of headstones with other emblems of belief, honoring those who paid the ultimate price on battlefields around the world. The day before, we visited Uvalde, Texas. In front of Robb Elementary School, we stood before 21 crosses for 19 third and fourth graders and 2 teachers. On each cross, a name, and nearby, a photo of each victim that Jill and I reached out to touch. Innocent victims murdered in a classroom that have been turned into a killing field. Standing there in that small town, like so many other communities across America, I couldn't help but think there are too many other schools, too many other everyday places that have become killing fields, battlefields here in America. We stood at such a place just 12 days before, across from a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, memorializing 10 fellow Americans, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, gone forever. At both places, we spent hours with hundreds of family members who were broken, whose lives will never be the same. They had one message for all of us: do something. Just do something. For God's sake, do something. after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time that can't be true. This time we must actually do something. The issue we face is one of conscience and common sense. For so many of you at home, I want to be very clear. This is not about taking away anyone's guns. It's not about vilifying gun owners. In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave. I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute. It was Justice Scalia who wrote, and I quote, "Like most rights, the Second Amendment, the rights granted by the Second Amendment are not unlimited." Not unlimited. It never has been. There have always been limitations on what weapons you can own in America. For example, machine guns have been federally regulated for nearly 90 years, and this is still a free country. This isn't about taking away anyone's rights. It's about protecting children. It's about protecting families. It's about protecting whole communities. It's about protecting our freedoms to go to school, to a grocery store, to a church, without being shot and killed. According to new data just released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, guns are the #1 killer of children in the United States of America. The #1 killer. More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough, enough? I know that we can't prevent every tragedy, but here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks, enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma of gun violence and as a consequence of that violence. These are rational, common sense measures. Here's what it all means. It all means this. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban on high-capacity magazines that we passed in 1994 with bipartisan support in Congress and the support of law enforcement. 9 categories of semi-automatic weapons were included in that ban, like AK-47s and AR-15s. And in the 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down. But after Republicans let the law expire in 2004, and those weapons were allowed to be sold again, mass shootings tripled. Those are the facts. A few years ago, the family of the inventor of the AR-15 said he would have been horrified to know that its design was being used to slaughter children and other innocent lives instead of being used as a military weapon on the battlefields as it was designed. That's what it was designed for. Enough. Enough. We should limit how many rounds a weapon can hold. Why in God's name should an ordinary citizen be able to purchase an assault weapon that holds 30-round magazines that let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets
with Ukrainians who are still there in the country there. That's as Russian forces continue to push closer and closer. They've done a great job, though, fending off a lot of those forces, according to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. So we'll continue to give you new details as we get them into the war itself. You know, later in the evening, we always have a recap with our national security expert, Hal Kempfer, there. But we also have an update from Ned Price with the State Department here. We'll listen into that briefly. And then coming up in just about 10 minutes or so, gas prices still hurting bad. That's because of a number of issues, including the war itself. So more on that here on Live Now.
Good day to turn up at the State Department, and I say that because we have a special guest, as you can see. It is my pleasure to introduce Rashad Hussain, Ambassador at Large. Hussain is our Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He's here today to offer some additional remarks on the 2021 International Religious Freedom Report, and then he will look forward to taking your questions. So without further ado, Ambassador Hussain.
Thanks to everybody coming on the show. We need weapons people to stop tyranny.
Today we released the 2021 International Religious Freedom Report. This comprehensive resource is an indispensable part of our efforts to advance human rights globally. The stories of so many people and the persecution that they face is brought to life in the pages documenting the state of international religious freedom in the report. The report clearly shows that governments and civil society must collaborate to address deteriorating conditions around the world. During the past year, we have seen increased repression by authoritarian governments and the politicized use of blasphemy, apostasy, and conversion laws, including against Christian communities. We're also witnessing rising societal violence against communities around the world. We're seeing increasing anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim attacks from Europe to South Asia. As the Secretary highlighted in his remarks, we remain concerned about members of religious minority groups in countries around the world, including in Afghanistan, Burma, the People's Republic of China, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Vietnam. The concerning trend lines in these countries underscore that much work remains to be done. Yet there is also reason for optimism. We are seeing the progress that is possible when civil society, coalition of activists, and multilateral bodies work with government, and in many cases when they push and when they challenge governments to live up to their obligations. And the Secretary earlier today highlighted just a few positive examples in Morocco, Iraq, Taiwan, and Timor-Leste. I look forward to the honest, frank conversations with my foreign counterparts and civil society interlocutors that will stem from the release of today's report. We need those conversations to generate and sustain continued progress. I'd like to thank those of you who are joining us in person and those that are joining virtually for covering the release of this report and for your interest to these important issues. Your advocacy is critical to continued progress. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
I've got a kind of a semi-unusual. There you go. Yeah, I can see it now. That's good. This report covers obviously.
Guys, while they're reporting on the Russian-Ukraine war, which you can figure out any time, listen, in Chicago over the weekend, there were 47 people shot, 10 dead. They're not telling you that on the news, but yet they're talking about the shooting in Oklahoma where 5 people were killed, which is unfortunate. But yet, why aren't they talking about Chicago with 47 shootings on a weekend? And that's like almost every weekend. Why are they not talking about that? Well, obviously, you know, they want to ban guns unless the criminals are murdering people left and right, then that's fine. But you, as an American citizen who questions your government and wonders why, gas prices are shooting up to $6 a gallon and why we're shutting down gas pipelines and why we have wars in Ukraine where we were sending billions of dollars. We're sending billions and billions of dollars over there, but they're saying we cannot reinforce schools where mass shootings happen rarely, but they can't reinforce the schools with more security guards or what have you, but yet every federal building is reinforced and secured with multiple armed guards, and all the Congress members have bodyguards and all this nonsense, but yet your children need to be exploited for the New World Order agenda. That's exactly why they're not securing the schools. That's why they call them gun-free zones, folks, because they want people to go in and shoot people there so that they can pass this nonsensical gun control law bills and so on. And if you're stupid enough to follow it, then you're going to be a slave. We can't stand up. We can't just go with this. We got to fight it. But we're going to go back to the State Department briefing on the Russia-Ukraine war.
The Ukraine and other parts of the world regarding the concerns that you mentioned.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to belabor this, but you're talking about the church itself, not the Kremlin per se.
That's right.
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks. Two questions that are somewhat unrelated, if you don't mind. In China and Tibet, the reincarnation issue, that's been something that's gotten a lot of attention recently. What's the trajectory that you see there? I mean, do you see any? Do you find that there's more adamance on the part of Beijing, perhaps, to try to force a reincarnation process for the next Dalai Lama? How is the U.S. reacting to that? Do you find is there a stance that the U.S. has ahead of whenever the reincarnation issue comes to?
The whereabouts of the Panchen Lama remained unknown since his 1995 abduction by PRC authorities, and actually May 17th will mark the 27th anniversary of his disappearance. And we are concerned that the PRC continues to deny members of the Tibetan community access to the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama designated Panchen Lama the second most revered figure in Tibetan Buddhism, and instead continues to promote a state-selected proxy. So we would urge the PRC authorities to account for the Panchen Lama's whereabouts and well-being immediately, and to allow him to fully exercise his human rights and fundamental freedoms in line with the PRC's international commitment. I actually had a chance to attend an event here in Washington a couple of months ago commemorating the disappearance of the Panchen
I have a
Lama
question for everybody. Am I
as well.
tripping, or did they have Biden give like a 5-minute speech and now they're going into other stuff? That was his whole speech? Was that Biden's whole speech? That's the question. Yeah, I got a beer here. Is that his whole speech? He's coming on to talk about how they're going to take your guns, and then they just push him off the stage and go into the Ukraine-Russian war. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. So you've got Biden and them coming in, basically, people. This is the next phase. I did a show on it. This is the next phase for their Great Reset, is gun confiscation. And you're seeing on the screen right now, as they have this guy talking, look to your right, shooting investigation at cemetery in Wisconsin. Why are we all of a sudden, as we get close to the midterm elections, having all of these massive shootings all of a sudden, just out of nowhere? And they are covering these shootings, so-called mass shootings. One, the unfortunate one in Texas with 19 children killed, but now in Oklahoma, 5 killed, and then the guy killed himself. He was looking for a doctor and couldn't find him and just shot some other people. And now in this cemetery, I don't know all the details, but in Chicago, 47 people shot, 10 people dead. Nothing on the news. Lori Lightfoot, the mayor there that looks like Beetlejuice, not saying anything. They don't care. It's because they don't care about gun control, people, as far as helping anybody. They want to control guns, obviously. They've got to get them out of your hands in order to complete the Agenda 2030 Great Reset program. That's what it's all about. That's exactly what it's about. But we're going to go back to this. They're still talking about the State Department debriefing on the Iran-Ukraine war that the United States started as well. But here it is, nevertheless.
In prison in China and North Korea right now. How is the United States getting involved in North Korea and China? and where there is no religion and oppression of religious peoples.
Yeah. Well, China continues to be one of the worst abusers of religious freedom in the world. They've engaged in genocide and crimes against humanity, against the Uyghurs. They also continue their repressions I spoke about of Tibetan Buddhists, but also Protestants, Catholics, the Falun Gong, Hui Muslims. We've taken a number of steps. China's been designated as a CPC since 1999. I alluded to the genocide determination. Congress passed and the president signed the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. As you recall, we decided not to send any diplomatic representation to the Olympics. We've implemented a series of financial sanctions, a number of visa restrictions as well. And with regard to North Korea, we note there that the government continues to execute, torture, arrest, and abuse individuals that are engaged in religious activity. And there's tens of thousands of political prisoners that are being held because of their religious beliefs, which are highlighted in our report. And
all right, guys, I'm going to break away from that. You know, they're talking about gun control measures. Recently, Mexico came out and basically was condemning the United States, saying, hey, you guys need to regulate your guns up there because that's the reason they're coming into Mexico. So Mexico basically is blaming the United States for all the drug cartels and the high murder rate there, even though they have severe gun control measures, some of the strictest in the world, but yet you have guns in the hands of criminals down there, but not in law-abiding citizens' hands and in corrupt police agencies there. And just a week ago, there was a report where some of the cartel groups lined up like 19 innocent people and just gunned them down with no real news here in the United States on it, unless you looked for it, unless you looked hard for it. But Biden came out with just a bunch of nonsense reading off the teleprompter, because here in the United States, people, yeah, they had a ban on what they call assault rifles, which really are not assault rifles. They just look like military-grade weapons because they're kind of fashioned after that. You know, the AR-15 is fashioned after the M16, the M4, and other weapons that are used in the military. But really, most military members would not probably go into war with an AR-15 unless they had to, unless that's what they had to use. They would probably use other grades of weapons to go into an actual war. But nevertheless, Biden and them are going to push this nonsense that, you know, when they had their weapons ban on what they call assault weapons, then it was all good. You know, oh, everything was great when they had banned assault weapons. But he said once they lifted that, then all hell broke loose, you know. So that's the thing. So basically, I've been talking about it, guys. The next phase in their globalist plan is to disarm you. You know, and we know that is what's happening. He is pushing to ban semi-automatic rifles. He's talking about 9mm, just all kinds of nonsense. And, you know, people have to stand up against it. You can't let this guy and this administration take your weapons, people. Because if they take your weapons, you are definitely going to become a slave. Now, he's supposed to be going to Delaware after that. Fox News correspondent Peter Doocy questioned the administration's motive behind the speech, by the way. He said, you guys at the White House have had some very hard headlines this week about inflation and baby formula. If there's nothing new you can point to in this speech tonight, did you just schedule it to get people to talk about something else? And then, you know, they had Biden on for what, like a minute? I mean, I don't even know how long it was. It was like 5 minutes or less. took no questions, just they cut away, and then they go to the Ukraine-Russian war and have them talking about human rights stuff with China, which they could give a damn about. They don't care about the Uyghurs, and they, they haven't cared for years and decades. But the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, said people have died in the past couple of weeks. In particular, we had 19 kids die in Uvalde. But did she talk about the 49 people shot in Chicago? No, she didn't say anything about that. And the 10 that died in Chicago in one freaking weekend. And this is happening every weekend in Chicago. And they have severe gun control measures, people, but the only people who have guns there are the bad guys. And the good law-abiding citizens have no guns and no means of protection, so they're getting gunned down. And gang violence and drug violence there as well. But Karine Jean-Pierre went on to say this is not about partisan politics. This is something he has worked on since he was a senator. It's very important and real to the president for the grieving families he has met in the last 2 weeks. Nonsense. It's nonsense. And but you have Jim Jordan, who pointed out on Twitter that Joe Biden said in 1985 when he was serving in the Senate that he never believed that additional gun control or federal registration of guns would reduce crime. This is what Joe Biden said in 1985. He said, during my 12 and a half years as a member of this body, I have never believed that additional gun control or federal registration of guns would reduce crime. That's what Biden said. But now that he's a globalist regime puppet, and he's just reading from the teleprompter, channeling the Obama agenda, now he's saying, that they got to get rid of guns and everything. And, Canada's saying that they're putting a gun freeze, and you can only have a magazine with 5 rounds. I mean, pretty soon you'll be like Barney Fife with his one bullet in his gun, that you got to get permission to put in the gun before you can shoot anybody. Conservative activist Scott Presler was joking on Twitter by asking Biden when he's going to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a black man shot and killed several people at a hospital. And so, he went to Buffalo, where a white man shot several people in a grocery store. But what about the black guy who went to Oklahoma, or was in Oklahoma, and shot people? And where's that on the news? Is it really being covered? Are they talking about it being a black man? And I'm not trying to attack black people on this, but I'm just saying what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if we're going to report on news, then we should report accurate news. But where is that? And Biden, who is Obama basically, his mouthpiece, is not talking about the black man who shot people just recently in Oklahoma. But, Nancy Pelosi had just a couple days before that introduced legislation that would ban what they're calling military assault style weapons, which is basically any semi-automatic rifle that looks scary to them, that looks like an AR-15 or anything else, like you're seeing on the screen where it says, come and take it. This, looks like a military weapon. It's a rifle, people. And if it's semi-automatic, every time you depress the trigger, it fires 1 round. An assault weapon would be one that would, fire rapid, multiple rounds on each trigger pull, which has already been banned federally. So, unless you have a license for it. So, that's already happened. But what they're trying to do is people, if you can't wake up and smell the tyranny, I don't know what you can do. But you have to see that they are trying to disarm you because they are pushing an agenda that they know you don't like. The majority of the American people do not like it. And they know that there will be resistance at some point, or they're trying to coax you into some type of civil war to get you to act first. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but certainly they are having a war on the Constitution. The United States Constitution is dangerous to these elitists who want to destroy it. So they want complete control. And right now, we know in Davos and in Switzerland right now, they are pushing for more legislation to give the World Health Organization more control. They already had world government summits talking about, revamping the financial system, just so many things. And, but yet the leftists are going to push the narrative that it's all white supremacy, even though it's not. They're going to push the idea that banning weapons is somehow going to make you safe. But I encourage everybody to watch the show that I put on recently about, it's from a movie called Innocence Betrayed, made by a Jewish organization, and it basically catalogs all of the countries that ever banned weapons from the masses of humanity and then committed mass atrocities, murder by government, called democide. That's exactly what happened. And so we're seeing the attack on the families. We're seeing now they're pushing more legislation again for future catastrophic events. Meanwhile, major economists are talking about how we're going to have a tsunami financially coming, a collapse that's going to be very, very massive. But there is a true evil behind these mass shootings that they don't want you to understand. If you think about it, before 1999, there really weren't that many school shootings. It was almost non-existent. And if there were, there would maybe be one or two people killed. Usually it was a boyfriend mad at a girl or a girl mad at a boyfriend or something, and they shoot the girl and then shoot themselves. But there wasn't massive shootings like there are now. But we have seen this pattern, and this pattern is being used to curtail the Second Amendment, people. And if you go back and you do research, you can go to the CIA website right now, and you can type in MK Ultra and Operation Artichoke, and you can see where the federal government was officially doing testing. Well, they were doing it clandestinely, but they were doing tests to create what they would call Manchurian candidates or assassins, basically, using drugs and other measures. And they claim that it failed and they shut it down and so on. But I have big doubts as to whether that was shut down or not. And then all of a sudden, when it's convenient for the Democrats, we start to see all these mass shootings. We didn't see we saw 4 major mass shootings during the Obama administration, and that was it during the whole 4 years. But we're now into the Biden administration, and before that in the Obama administration, we're seeing all these mass shootings every time Democrats are in office for some reason, and right around election time. Things that make you go, So I have a Rumble channel. I'll put the link below, because here on this channel, you kind of have to censor what you're talking about. But this is the plan to destroy the Second Amendment and individual freedom. Excuse me. And individual freedom. That's exactly what it's about. And you have the Great Reset being set up. Klaus Schwab and them talk about it. They say it's a conspiracy theory, and yet you can go to the World Economic Forum's site and they show you plainly, yes, their goal is for you to have nothing and own nothing, and to eat bugs, and to not have private transportation, all of these things. But yet it's right there in plain sight on their site. But if you talk about it on YouTube or certain social media sites, you are a conspiracy theorist, and it's false. And they get their fact checkers to fact check it, and they simply say, well, that's not true. I want to show a video, and this one is a great video. I believe this is by Greg Reese. Hopefully it will play and won't get banned. But this is the truth, and I want to play it right now. So pay attention to this video, a great report by Greg Reese. If it'll play.
Perhaps the most evil display of deception and murder we are subjected to today are found in the new phenomenon of mass school shootings. Prior to 1999, they were practically non-existent, but today they have almost become predictable. And if you are able to examine the evidence objectively without getting emotional, a pattern can be recognized. Former Naval Intelligence Officer turned whistleblower Milton William Cooper wrote in his book, Behold a Pale Horse, published in 1991, that the CIA was using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in order to persuade them to open fire on schoolyards, to inflame the anti-gun lobby, and do away with the Second Amendment. This probably sounds outlandishly evil, and it is, but the evidence is there. In the Columbine shootings of 1999, we are told that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold acted alone. The town of Columbine, Colorado, was created in 1958 for families and employees of the military-industrial complex. Eric and Dylan were arrested a year prior to the shooting and were allegedly sodomized by the arresting officer, which may sound crazy, but a local officer admitted to raping informants, which is a known method of trauma-based mind control. After this January incident, Eric and Dylan were put into a juvenile diversion program and prescribed SSRI drugs known to cause homicidal ideation. During this time, Eric Harris was making online death threats and bomb threats. Local police were aware of this and drafted a search warrant affidavit, but it was ignored. Eric and Dylan threatened revenge for the January incident in their yearbook. They produced a school video about their plans and began openly collecting weapons. All of this while on probation, and nothing was done about it. During the shootings, the police stood outside the building and did nothing, while the sounds of automatic gunfire and explosions continued for hours. In official transcripts, there are over 100 witnesses who saw more than 2 shooters, and more than 40 witnesses who identified the same 2 men in their 30s, one balding and the other with a short military-style haircut. Several witnesses described the same adult male throwing a pipe bomb on the roof of the library, all of them certain that it wasn't Dylan or Eric. And all of this information pertaining to additional shooters has been redacted. The FBI agent in charge of the Columbine investigation had a son who recently attended the school, who shot a student film inside Columbine High 2 years before the shooting about a character wearing a trench coat shooting up the school. Dylan and Eric fantasized about hijacking an airplane and crashing it into a New York City skyscraper in 1999. Are these just strange coincidences or remnants of the Fed's MK Ultra program? An honest investigation into any of the mass school shootings following Columbine will have the same signatures, such as families involved in the military-industrial complex, prescribed SSRIs and other psychotropic drugs, psychological care provided by the state, and associations with law enforcement prior to the shootings. Just like we saw with the retired federal agent in regular communication with the Buffalo gunman in a private Discord chat room. And in the recent Texas school shooting, how is the perpetrator able to afford nearly $5,000 of weaponry? And why did the police stand down while children were slaughtered? We are still allowed to question these things, but for how long? This evil will never stop until the truth is exposed. And unfortunately, most of us are too emotional to see things as they really are. Reporting for InfoWars, this is Greg Reese. Of mass school shootings. Prior to 19...
Sorry about that. Greg Reese usually does some really good reports, and you have to understand that. That's, again, go back and look at some of the patterns of shootings in the past. I don't care what they say. There's a history of psychotropic drugs, these people being alienated, the FBI knowing these people having patterns and records, and they do nothing. They do nothing. They allow them to go forth and commit the act, and then they stop them and then they exploit it for gun control. This is exactly what it's for. So every American has to be resolute to say, we're not giving up our guns. We don't care how many psychos are out there. We don't care how many mass shootings there are. Because, again, if you look at it, you have federal buildings that are protected better than Fort Knox. And yet, schools, for some reason, can't have proper security. And they have to be gun-free. Why do schools have to be gun-free zones? They say, well, it's to protect the children. And yet, then you have these mass shootings where the children are killed, and then they cry about the dead children. These are the same Democrats that don't give a damn about abortion. They murder millions of children a year. So do you really think that they care about your children? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so there's a full assault on our country right now. There's a full assault on our borders. There's a full assault on our children, on our institutions. There's a full assault on the family unit. There's a full assault on your Constitution. And yeah, obviously we're not going to tolerate that. But here goes the drop frames, obviously. Every time that I start reporting and getting into the news, they want to then all of a sudden start attacking the streaming and so on. But that's what it's about, people. So this is an attack on the Constitution. This was a diversion tonight. They had Biden on for 5 minutes or less. I am going to post this at Rumble, my Rumble channel, Sic Semper Tyrannis News.